ballpark figure from going from a 1 kg roaster in Bali 9 years ago to today expanding to Malaysia. What is the company worth?
What's the company worth?
Yeah, ballpark.
Well, I don't know. I've got a lot of love that goes into to the business, a lot of blood, sweat and tears. That's worth a lot in that value of our overall brand.
Of course.
The more coffee we sell in our toll roasting gives us more security for the base of our brand. So every time we do that, we grow more. Our customer base grows bigger and bigger. So if our business is growing at 30% plus per year.
Okay, it's a lot of cappuccinos.
That's it's a lot. It's a lot of cappuccinos.
While the world's still asleep, we're already grinding. Walking foreign streets, big city lights so blinding. Learning and hustling in this relentless game. The Emerge Pod's next up, we're breaking the frame.
Hi, and welcome to the Emerge Podcast, where we break down emerging markets and give you actionable insights on how to start and grow your business in them. Today, we are in the beautiful city of Kuala Lumpur, and joining us in this wonderful studio is the CEO of Expat Roasters Bali, Shae. Shae, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So, Shae, before we get into how you built an empire of specialty coffee in Bali, because Expat Roasters is seen by many as one of the best emerging brands when it comes to specialty coffee. Yep. Before we get into what that is, how that came to be, I first want to talk about you. So how did you get into coffee?
Well, I got into coffee when I was very young. So I was 14 or 15 and I used to sit in cafes and I used to watch the baristas work. I used to smell the cafes. I used to love the environment and the energy that was happening within a cafe. And I always wanted to drink coffee, but I didn't like the taste of it. So this was a training for a few years of where I started off drinking like hot chocolates and adding a little bit of coffee, getting a really weak mocha,
This sounds like a Willy Wonka story.
Exactly. Right. So started, doing this and learning more about coffee, learning more about the industry, learning more about cafes, and eventually started drinking coffee a lot more. I started working in a restaurant at nights, and a coffee rep came in one day and said, "Who wants to learn how to make coffee?" So I jumped on. I learned how to make coffee there. I did another training course, and this was all by about 17, I suppose. I'd kind of done these things, and after I left school, I started working with my dad in his business. But most of the time I'd be sitting downstairs in the cafe, and I think it was one day he said to me, how many people do you think they've served in the cafe today? And I was like, I'm guessing about 650 to 700 thing. How many coffees do you think they make? About this, and then he said to me, "How are you going on the project that you're working on?" He goes, and I said, I don't know exactly where I'm at. And so I think I knew more about the cafe and the business there. And so, he said to me, "I think you should go back to working in cafes and see what see if that's your passion. Go do it, but go work in some busy cafes." So I started working in for a hospitality company that put me in a site where I was doing maybe 1,200, 1,300 coffees a day.
Wow. Okay.
So
and this was back in Australia, right?
In Australia. Yeah. So in Sydney, and this was, this was the best place to learn. I had, coffee companies that were supportive at the time. I had a great company that I worked for that was helping to train me and develop me, and I was also learning by doing so many coffees per day. Yeah, this was great. I had a great manager at the time, so. Got into it and became, more and more passionate. Developed the skills, and I ended up from doing that and working, restaurants and doing just a few coffees a night into those type of roles where I was doing thousands of coffees per day, and then I ended up going to, traveling around the world and setting up cafes in different areas. In Venice, in Italy, I set up a cafe in just outside of Venice.
Okay. So was that your own brand or was that for someone else?
No, that was for someone else, yeah.
Okay.
So I was in London at the time and got contacted to say, can I come across and help them set up this cafe that's in a tourist park, right where the ferries take everyone into Venice, and there's all different cultures coming through. So there's different people. So can we do a cafe that's going to be a little bit more internationally, or understanding international coffees or beverages more than what was happening currently. So we went and we redesigned the cafe a little bit, changed it up, trained staff, spent a little bit.
So how do you transition from being a barista and training to be a barista to actually helping cafes run and revamp?
Yeah, so the company that I worked for was a catering company and a hospitality company that had multiple sites. So when I first started, I worked for this company. I was doing 1,200 cups per day in the one cafe. But then if they needed help in other cafes, I would go and help out in the other cafes. And then I ended up going into a role where I helped the coffee company do more training for these other cafes while I was working for the business. So the coffee company, gave me, a lot of information, gave me a lot of training, and then I could deliver it on site. So that on-site training for staff. So I would then, I then got a role where I would do new site openings, training. I would do if any of the venues were a bit run down or not working very well, I'd go in and fix them up. I would go help them if they were going for tender for a new site. I would go help them, in that process. So I was doing this role where it was, if a manager was away, I would go fill in for the manager and then do training as well while I was there, and it became this coffee specialist role where it was, I would be like a roving barista, but also training and managing cafes.
That sounds like the perfect breeding ground for, what you did next as an entrepreneur, because you learned how to, make 1,000 cups a day. I can imagine that when you're making 1,000 cups, you go through every possible thing that can happen when you're making coffee. And then you go into training, so you're training other people. Then you're going into revamping and, helping out branches be more profitable and be more. So that pretty much set the stage. There was nothing else you could have done after that except start a brand.
Well, it was funny. Well, after that, I worked for two coffee companies. After that, but the coffee companies I worked for were both, amazing, great. I've got good relationships with people and the staff and the businesses still. But I worked for a Melbourne coffee company after that, which was changing from an Italian brand into a more of an urban coffee brand. So they rebranded, re-looked at what coffee they were using, the origins, how to do specialty, how to do these the different coffees that were just coming into the market or changing in the market, but also do it in a way where we were being really, I suppose, different in the marketing. And I think the company had a philosophy around taking coffee seriously, but not ourselves. So we made lots of jokes in our marketing campaigns, and we had a lot of fun in what we were doing, and really, had a super fun work environment while selling this delicious coffee. So it was where a lot of people were too busy focusing on just the coffee itself. But they weren't, they didn't have all that. Where we came in and anyway, developed this, great culture in the company. And then I ended up getting an offer to go work for Coca-Cola. They've got a coffee company in Australia called Grinders Coffee. And so I worked for them. I ended up being the coffee ambassador for Coca-Cola Amatil, so for the region at the time.
All right.
And where from there, I learned a lot about business. I learned a lot about, scaling businesses. I learned a lot about, different aspects, managing the not only teams, but managing in a corporate environment or managing staff with and how to
work at scale, basically.
Yeah, and also there's difference in having a small business where you're just day to day in the business and doing it, and there's also difference when you have to report what's happening in the company. And you need to You need to have deliverables, that tangible things that.
So the whole corporate environment of working, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
so to learn all this, and then also I got access to see everything else that was happening in the region. So for New Zealand and for but also for Indonesia.
Okay.
And
that's where Indonesia came into
beverage
picture.
sales.
Right.
I saw how cans like Coke was selling in Indonesia. I got access to things around the economy and what was happening with the growth in the market and different areas, and I learned about the different cities and where they were selling the product and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was nice to get all of these great learnings from these businesses. So one which was a hospitality company where I did multiple roles within the business, and I learnt about how to run cafes, but also train staff around coffee, which was great for the cafe side. I worked for a coffee company that was fun, and the marketing was different, and it was revolutionary in the way of what we were talking about and how we were doing things. We won a lot of awards for our coffee, but also at the same time, everyone was talking about, the team and what we were doing, what events we were putting on, and the parties we were holding, and all this sort of stuff as well. So, and then went with the big corporate and learned about business on a scale and how to do these things. So
again, it feels like that all of this was setting the stage for that big start in Indonesia. So what was the aha moment where you realized that now you're in Coke, you're looking at the Indonesian region.
Yep.
Now you wanted to take a dive and start a business in Bali. What was that moment?
Yeah, I went and I saw the growth of some of these Australian cafes, Australian style cafes in Bali, and I saw that they were doing really well, and they were doing some great numbers, and also the way that they were running. But when I looked into it, and I did a little bit of consulting and helped some of them out, and I found that there was no coffee companies that were doing great training, great coffee, great service, after sales support. There was no one that was doing the total package.
So there were people that were doing some things right, but there was no one who was doing everything right.
From what I felt, what I saw, it seemed to be there was some people doing cafes well. There were some people that were really good roasters. There were some people that understanding farming and the farming techniques, but there was no one company that was doing it all. And at the time, my son I had one son, and he was only very young. And I saw this path through either through corporate and with working for Coca-Cola, or I could take the jump now.
When you can risk it,
When I can risk it. My son was only young before he'd started school or anything that was too much. So I jumped across. I set up a little cafe, which was maybe 4 by 5 meters or something. It was only a small little espresso bar, and that was our first start in end of 2016.
Okay, so that wasn't very long ago. It's like 9 years now.
Yeah,
right?
so we're coming up. We're going coming up to 9 years as trading. So
that's amazing. So going from all of that exposure to, I believe, then going back to being a barista for yourself. Is that how it started? So you were the barista first, and then you were also running the business, or did you hire a team right away?
Yeah, I think in Indonesia there's definitely legalities around what you can and can't do. So when I first got there, I said, I want to get my kitas and my working permit, and I said, just put me down as a barista. That's what I am, And I was still, even though I worked at, when I was working in Coca-Cola, I was, a reasonable level within the business. But people would still say to me, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "I'm a barista." If I went to a party, I'm a barista. That's my trade. So I am. If someone is, in Australia, very much people identify as their trade, in lots of ways. So. I always said that, and so I said to can I put down for my kitas? I said, put me down as a barista, and they said you can't. You can't get a kitas, you can't get a working visa for a barista. So challenge why, and they said you need to be at at a more senior level. You need to be delivering more than just a staff level role. So then the visa that I went onto the working visa I went onto didn't allow me to actually work behind the coffee machine.
Okay,
it was a general manager or I can't remember the exact title for the first one that I was on, but it was what it was is I could help manage the business, but I wasn't allowed to actually take money in the till or
Okay.
put do transactions with customers or work as a barista. So then I was had to take a step back again and say, okay, so how am I going to how am I going to access this? Like, how am I going to access this market without being hands-on?
Mm-hmm.
So I made sure I had great people around first that started working with us the day one or before day one even, and that are still with us today. So we've got some.
So you built that great culture that you saw in that coffee company, and you built that for your own company as well.
That's what. Yeah, I tried to take the best of all of these businesses that I worked for before, and to be able to bring them in and then adapt them to Indonesia. Right. So there's also a difference in, in Australia. I think that there's difference in how you might socialize after work.
Absolutely.
Compared to Indonesia, or a difference between where how long the boss is out with you compared to in Indonesia, or what they so trying to understand the difference of difference in managing, and also just how to make the culture the best culture possible.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, and understanding the differences between people in different.
Now I'm trying to imagine, what it was like running that first year in Bali with your own business, and I'm sure it must not have been easy, because Bali while it does have a huge amount of opportunity, it comes with its own set of challenges.
Yep.
So how did you find it, Bali, overall in your first year with the people that you were able to hire?
Yep.
Or the availability of resources? Generally, that's seen as an issue in Bali for a lot of people in the F&B industry. Did you experience that issue with availability of resources in both raw material and people?
So I was lucky when we set up the business. I had a partner who had a business running already in Bali.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Which was really a blessing to have access to his knowledge and the people within his already in his business, and the knowledge from those guys. So to be able to walk into somewhere like Bali and have know who to contact for.
Yeah, that might have been a nightmare, but you had someone already. Okay.
Exactly, which made things a lot easier to do that. But within that first year, after 1 year of trading in Bali, we ended up separating the businesses. So where I bought him out of the business as well, so we separated them out. So then it was a learning curve again.
Yeah.
So didn't have those resources, but when we started, it was definitely learning how to balance what the ideals were of what I had in the Australian business mindset, and understand the culture of Indonesia, but also of Bali.
Yeah.
So Bali and all different regions around Indonesia, the culture is different.
Absolutely, the way people work is very different.
The way people work is different. The way people like to be managed is different.
Yeah.
So to learn all those things was really tricky. It was a learning curve, but also then to look into things like business setups, structures, taxes, how to run a company in multiple streams. As I started to wholesale coffee and roast coffee, and then how do we manage staff in in operations of cafes, and also in training and development, and then sales, and then as that all came in, that was.
It kind of worked, yeah. All of it coming together.
Well, it all came together, but it was also the challenges along the way were constant. Every day challenges in learnings and challenges and different advice from people as well. So hearing from one person one thing, and then hearing from another person another thing, and you think you're doing things right, and then someone says, "Oh no, but you can do it this way as well," and then you can change and you can do it. So having to learn and pick up all those things was.
But still, I'd say that you were in a better position as opposed to a couple of other people that I've spoken to, who pretty much just come to Bali and fall in love with the island, and then they start a business without having any understanding of what the actual challenges are going to be. But I believe having a partner who was already doing that stuff might have made the first couple of months much easier had that person not been in place. So it kind of did ease you guys into it, even though there were still challenges.
Most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I came to Bali for Indonesia.
Yeah.
I love Bali.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Bali is now my home. Bali, it's one of the most amazing places on earth for me. Like the feeling in Bali that you get, the feeling of freedom, the sense of when you smell the incense burning, and there's the flowers and everything that's going on in Bali. Always the senses are crazy. You're riding through rice fields. You've got chaos of Denpasar and the cities, and you've got the tourists, and you've got it has this spiritual element. It has an amazing Indonesian culture. It has this Balinese Hindu culture. It has the international influence. So Bali, I love Bali. No questions asked. But I came to Bali for Indonesia.
Okay.
I saw the growth in Indonesia, and I saw it was a business opportunity for growing a company through Indonesia, and then to expand for the rest of the region. So,
And you capitalize on that pretty quickly, because in the last 9 years, you now have 9 locations in Indonesia?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're 9 locations currently. We're building some more as we speak, and we wholesale to around 700. Currently, maybe 700 odd venues that we.
So retailers. Yeah.
Yes, other cafes, other restaurants.
Oh,
some,
got it. Okay.
Some some coffee chains, some small coffee chains or coffee groups, or different businesses that use coffee.
I love how this conversation is kind of progressing into the business side of things. Love that. Do you find the wholesale and retail part of coffee in Indonesia more lucrative as compared to running a chain of cafes?
I think wholesaling coffee is this is the core of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
If we broke it down to just one thing, it is that we're a coffee company that roasts coffee. We source delicious coffee from origins, mostly around Indonesia, but some from around the world, but mostly Indonesian coffees. We roast to high spec. We have great QC practices, and then we distribute that to venues around Indonesia. Some of those being our own venues,
Your own, yeah.
and a lot being other venues as well. And that's the core of what we do. Now, the coffee chain and the coffee coffee shops, we started with that to build the brand, and that was how do we put a cafe somewhere that we can have the marketing that comes from a cafe.
Mm-hmm.
How do we grow our brand presence through a cafe that we can use for social media content. We can use it for marketing, for tastings, for training, and we can use this cafe. And then what we found was we're doing cafes really well. So,
okay.
And when we looked at all of our the venues that we have that are buying coffee off us, we're selling a lot to our own venues per outlet.
Got it. Okay.
So we realized that the venues that we were operating, were great businesses within their own right. Mm-hmm. And so how can we do, and we always wanted to do multiple cafes. Mm-hmm. That was always part of it. It was branding as well as, but then we looked and thought, how can we do it on more scale? So rather than putting one in each city around Indonesia, how can we do a multiple of, brew bars, some little kiosks, some flagships with full restaurant style, full kitchens, all day dining. How can we do the different styles of, coffee
what a cafe
venues?
Can be, yeah.
What a cafe can be, right? So if it's a little grab and go kiosk where it's just, some pastries and takeaway coffees, or whether it's a full dining experience where we've got, trained chefs and we're trying to, work with experimenting with produce and different elements of the food as well as to complement that coffee.
So I like that you've got a very strong focus on the coffee that you roast yourselves.
Yep.
So in the first cafe that you had, did you have your own coffee only, or were you having like coffee from other brands as well?
Yeah, so I set it up straight away we had a partner.
Basically, the question is were you a roaster first or were you a barista first for yourself? Yeah.
We were we set up the company as if we were a roaster from day one,
Okay.
but we didn't have the equipment on day one.
So you got toll manufacturing from someone else.
So
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
So we partnered with someone who we still, who they have got access. They actually a producer and a roaster.
Got it.
So when they were experimenting with some coffees, I was like, I love what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
This is really cool. Can you roast this coffee for us? But transparent, I am going to be roasting. And as soon as I can take over any elements,
Of course.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, absolutely, no worries. And then we can always sell you the green beans.
Yeah.
Once you start roasting anyway, that's fine. And still to today, that was 10 years ago. And now, so that was for my friend's cafe at the time.
Yeah.
And I said, but it's going to be this under this brand. And we changed it. 10 years later, I still buy a lot of green beans from him. I still have lunch with him often, talk about the industry and really, try and, support each other and help each other still to today, that same bit. But once we started roasting, we got a little 1 kilo roaster and this 1 kilo, and we had a little a shed in a small gang in Seminyak. And
Okay.
it was a very... it was much smaller than this space we're in right now, right? There's little, and we used to roast 1 kilo, less than 1 kilo at a time. We ended up getting, by the time it was roasted and depreciation, we had got about 500 grams of coffee per roast.
Okay.
And so we were definitely, there was a busy time where we were roasting 20 or 30 roasts in a day, constant roasting like this. But we would buy other coffees and we'd start to blend them together.
Okay.
So at first we did everything roasted outside of for the first couple of months, and then we started roasting a small amount. So we would roast our single origins, and we would roast one element for the blends.
Okay.
So if we had a blend of Sumatra and Bali and Toraja or something, we would roast just the barley.
And you'd
But
get
then
the rest.
other ones
Yeah.
roasted and brought in. So we start off just slowly, but we were always our name Expat Roasters. We were a coffee roaster.
Got it. Yeah.
That was the vision.
It was
the
the way
goal.
that the
That's
company was
always,
set up. Yeah.
Always set up like that.
So with the cafes that you started, again, 9 locations in 9 years, whether they're small or big, it's still a huge achievement for a brand that started 9 years ago. Do you work on a franchise model, or I can see that you have partners wherever you're going. So is that something that you continued for all of these other 9 locations as well?
Yeah. So for some of them, we work on different models where we partner, and we do multiple different setups. Some of the projects we do a partnership but run them as if they're a franchise.
Okay.
So
with a royalty agreement or something?
So some come down to a royalty agreement, some come down to there's joint ventures, but the different structures on different sites are all
unique.
Yeah. We needed to test out what it would look like if it was a franchise business. So if one day if we want to become a franchise, like cafe franchise business, that we could do that easily. So
because
we would
you've
have
experimented with a couple of different styles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
or if we wanted to just invest in more ourselves and do bring in investors and run them all ourselves, we could do that as well.
Okay.
So we've experimented with a few different models and how that would look, and even if some things are run as, even if they might be set up as a joint venture or someone who's invested in a business, or that we've invested in someone in another company, but we still run it a certain way to get the learnings for what we're wanting.
Okay, so let's talk about the general way that you've started these other 9, locations. In terms of how easy or difficult it is to start a business or set up a business in Indonesia, how was your experience with these expansions when it comes to the legal side of things? Was it very easy as a foreigner to come in and start that first thing in Bali with a local partner, of course, and then expand, or did you come into trouble with understanding what the legal requirements were?
Yeah, straight away when you walk into Indonesia, you hear so many different things.
Yeah.
People talking about all these different business setups and different business structures, and we straight away got advice from how do we set up a business that we can have a a strong business that's here for the long term. We're not going to be, we don't want to set up a company that's just here for 1 or 2 years and we close it down and then we set up something else. So we got advice straight away, and then we had 3 or 4 different consultants in different areas of the business to make sure that the structure was structured as well as can be for our first company, and then used different legal advisors for the different companies that we've set up since, or that we've been part of since, or that other people have set up using our brand, and how we can do that. But Indonesia's obviously got a lot of nuances, and it's very tricky in so even some things that we might run as if they're a franchise style business, so that the structures are still set up that it's that's run independently, that it's almost but we might have still got investment. It might be a partnership that we're still doing, but it might be, but we're trying to get the learnings from one model, or within.
So in some cases, the primary company that you set up, the first PTPMA, correct?
Yeah.
So the first company that you set up, does that company have shareholding in all of the other companies that you've set up, or is that a different structure every time?
So there's different structures. There has to be different structures every time. So Indonesia, again, legalities around different structures and different business models, and how that set up, and foreign investment into businesses. Because if you're setting up a kiosk, you can never hit the minimum. There's not the minimum investment needed for another PMA. So we can't 10 billion for a kiosk.
For a kiosk,
right?
absolutely.
Right? This is not so.
Not feasible,
So there's different business structures and models. And
does your industry require any halal certification or product registrations?
Yep. So a lot. So we're just going. We've got a new factory getting built currently. We've got now halal certified for all products to that. BPOM. So we've had PIRTs so for products in the past, and now moving into the new facility, we're setting it up with full BPOM standards and making sure that it's all that we will have a facility that will be more than Indonesian standards, so we can be have some international food safety and certifications and things like that as well, that we're trying to implement as well.
So you mentioned that you have this one facility where you're roasting and preparing your products. So is that how you manage all of your 9 locations plus all the other retailers from one factory, or do you set up like small roasteries in different places?
One factory.
There's one factory, and that's based in Bali.
Bali, yep.
Okay, fantastic.
So Bali's still our head office.
Yeah.
Bali's still it's where we're roasting. It's still it's still our home. It's still the core of our business, right? So
again, when it comes to setting up this factory, I know that you guys started in Bali, and that's pretty much where you set this up. Over time, have you found that it might be better to set up this factory somewhere outside Bali as well? So in the last 9 years, basically, why have you stuck with Bali as where you are roasting?
Bali's got its challenges in the way of trying to access Java. It's got or the majority of people in Indonesia. It's got different challenges with it's got more holidays than most places on earth. It's got Bali has still got a brand associated to it that if we're setting up, or we in the last few years we've done pop-ups and we've done expos all around the world. If we say we're from Jakarta, he'll go, oh, okay, and they think big city, Southeast Asia, big city, whatever. But but
very
when you
corporate
factories, industrial, these type of things, right? If we say, we've got the head office, our roastery in Surabaya, the people don't know what that is around, where that is. But if you go anywhere in the world and you say that we're roasting in Bali, and we're founded in Bali, and
that automatically gives you that very natural and earthy kind of,
it gives you a feeling.
Yeah.
It gives a feeling that is core to our brand. And everywhere we go, we always say we need to be an international brand. We need to grow. We need to develop around the world. We need to change but we always need to have a splash of Bali. No matter where we are, we always need to have that Bali element, whether it's in our uniforms or whether it's whatever. But always have barley coffee that we're
Mhm.
using. Always have some things to make sure that people get this feeling of barley when they're, if they're in, eventually if we're roasting in or we're brewing coffee anywhere in the world, that it can be a big city anywhere in the world and you can have this feeling of barley. That's the...
No, I like that. From a brand and marketing perspective, I feel like that is definitely the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
But from a logistics perspective,
Yep.
as you mentioned that, it's something I've encountered with other people as well, that, logistics to and from Bali are not
Yep.
always as easy.
That's right. Yeah.
So do you find that, the cost benefit analysis, it's
Yep.
still okay to operate out of Bali?
Yeah, to have, if we were going to set up, say, 3 roasteries,
Mhm.
or maybe 4 roasteries in Indonesia.
And would that make more financial sense?
Well, the cost of equipment,
Yeah.
the cost of the rent and labor and everything added on, then you have to hold stock, you have to hold extra stock
Yeah.
in all those locations. So, stock is obviously what we're holding green, like our raw product.
Mhm.
Then our packaging, all sorts of stuff. Then the roasted product that we have to hold just before we send it out. We're always sitting on quite a lot of money in that. And then if we have more locations, you have to have more of that. So
Yeah.
there's going to be extra. There will be extra in all those sites. So there is a cost to all that as well. And 10 years ago, first started talking about Indonesia.
Mhm.
Someone said to me, Shae, you need to stop thinking like a coffee roaster.
Mhm.
And you need to start thinking about logistics.
Yeah.
You need to think about distribution. You're a distribution company first and a coffee company second.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's a strange way to think. And then all of a sudden I realized what he was talking about. So how do you access all these places around Indonesia, especially from Bali?
Mm.
It makes it even harder. So, but 10 years ago, it was hard when we started looking. When we set up the business 9 years ago, we started doing a little bit in Jakarta. But now, now we send coffee weekly to Kalimantan, to all around, in Sumatra, lots of places around Java, where, most, first, second, third tier cities, we've got a presence of some sort
Mhm.
in there that's using our coffee. So I think we've been lucky to be able to come in at that time where,
Things were
logistics,
getting
everything
better,
was
yeah.
getting better.
Yeah.
The companies that were in logistics at the time,
Mhm.
I think were a bit complacent around
Yeah.
in Indonesia, and they were very focused on Jakarta especially, but Jakarta, Surabaya, that's the big cities in Java maybe,
Mm.
and now it's the logistics are a lot better. We find we've got we can do overnight deliveries to to most places
Okay.
in Java and Bali, whatever else it is. We've got within 1 or 2 days
Mhm.
we can get most places in Indonesia. So
Okay, so let's now take that logistics question to the international scale.
yep,
So you mentioned you're now exploring some international avenues for Expat Roasters
right.
to now expand to. What's next on the table?
most months we'll have an international inquiry
Mm-hmm.
from someone that will say, we'd love to do Expat Roasters somewhere in the Middle East, in Europe, in China, or in all these areas around the world. And the thing that excites us is is this part of the world. So
Mm-hmm.
we're really excited around what's happening in Asia, Southeast Asia, around Indonesia, the growth of Indonesia, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. And we've got our first the first roastery that we're setting up, international roastery we're setting up as an independent roaster in Kuala Lumpur.
Wonderful.
So I'm
Yeah.
here checking out a few things this week as well.
Okay.
So we should be set up within the next couple of months. We
Mhm.
should have the roastery up and running, and we
Okay.
should be
Well, you heard it here first.
by the end of the year. Yeah, so by the end of this year, we should be operating in Indonesia and Malaysia full coffee brands.
Okay, fantastic. So let's talk about that. So now that you have that factory in Bali, this is going to be your second factory that
That's
you're
right.
setting up in Malaysia. Are you going to retain that Bali roots
Mm-hmm.
in the Malaysian roasting as well? So will you be importing a lot of Bali
Yep.
coffee, or
Yep.
will you be experimenting with local flavors as well?
Yep, a bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
We will always have our core blends for our coffee blends that we do. We'll always be using barley coffees
Mm-hmm.
everywhere we go. So we'll make sure that we've still got. So we'll be making sure that we're bringing in all the raw product
Mhm.
into Malaysia. from Indonesian, but also, again, Malaysia's got some great coffees here as well. So
Yeah, I'd agree.
know,
Yeah, but I mean, it's very different than Bali coffee.
very
of course.
different.
Very
Yeah,
different.
Yeah, I arrived last night at 9 o'clock or something, and I was, at 9:30 or 10 o'clock, I'm at the markets eating some food, talking about how we can book in some meetings with. We'll get to the farms in the next month or two. So get to a few farms in Malaysia as well, and to start to build those relationships and understand what's happening, how the processing trends are happening, what varietals they're using in Malaysia, how we can adapt and implement some coffees from here into what we're doing, so we can also stay access to the local produce. Right, this is. It's something that we were blessed with in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And the fact that coming to Malaysia, that we've got access to that as well.
Absolutely.
I think it's the core of what we do. We're born in Bali. We're a Bali coffee roaster, but at the same time, and using majority Indonesian coffees. At the same time, while we're coming to Malaysia, we've got access to this coffee. We definitely want to make sure we've got some flavors, some splashes, some of the coffee implemented.
And so your model is going to be very similar to what you initially did in Bali. So instead of having a partner for roasting, you'll have your own roasting.
Yep.
But then you have your own cafe, and then you'll start the whole distribution part
Yep.
of the business as well.
That's right.
So have you already begun discussing the distributions with potential buyers in Malaysia?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So we've just started conversations, very loose conversations. There's people that have said to us, oh my gosh, Expat Roasters coming into Malaysia.
Yeah.
I know we need to talk, whether it's a small cafe, a small little specialty cafe, saying, I love it. It's one of my favorite cafes around the world, and my favorite coffees around the world. I love what you guys do, the packaging, the brand, the coffee. So there's people that are contacting us already that have heard we're doing this, which is great. We've also been in contact with some of the larger groups, coffee chains, that we know through different areas around the world.
Of course.
That that are in Malaysia already. So talking to them, talking to all sorts of people that we feel like we could support, but currently we're not roasting yet. So
of course, everything up till that point is just talk. So
Yeah.
I mean, when you actually start roasting, that's when you start delivering.
That's right.
So
So our business is a mix. Our roasting business is a mix of, branded specialty coffees. It's also, then we have our contract and our toll as well that we do, so that we help to do coffee at at some sort of scale, that people have got a chain or people have got more than a few cafes that we can help to do coffee for them.
Okay.
That's a bit better than most.
So not your own blends, but blends that they want.
That they want as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll do some of that.
So you do that kind of toll manufacturing. Are you doing that in Bali already?
We're currently doing that. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. That's a great way of doing business. That you've got your own house, brands and blends. You're selling them at your own locations, and then you're creating coffees for other brands as well.
That's right.
And then you're selling your own brand as wholesale and retail as well.
Yep.
Retail. So you got into retail as well for general household use as well, right?
So we're online. So we sell online, and we also do a little bit through some supermarkets.
Okay.
In Indonesia. I'm trying to play with different brands or different blends or price points, what works. Still haven't worked this out exactly. What's the best route to market through supermarkets. But eventually one day I think we'll have coffee through supermarkets as well. But we want to make sure we keep to the integrity of the product. So the product still needs to be delicious. We don't want to put something in to at a cheaper price point to get to just so we can be there. That's not the point for us.
Okay. Well, I'd say that in the end, I likely like to touch upon the financials, if you're comfortable sharing. I'm assuming that you have primarily held a majority of equity in the whole company, right? So is it primarily you as the major shareholder, or do you have like many partners?
Yeah, we've obviously got a few different models with our retail arms or our cafes. And there's different shareholders and different shareholding agreements
for each specific
location, and how that works. for our holding company, we've got a holding company in Hong Kong,
Smart. Yeah.
which owns the business in Indonesia. And so for that, I have some silent investors as well. That's some invest in that, but yeah, I'm the majority shareholder and the.
So you've had to let go of some equity to get these investors in to the Hong Kong holdco. Yeah.
So Hong Kong. So I had a partner in. So for Hong Kong. So when I started,
Mm-hmm.
I had a partner in Bali
Mhm.
straight away in the company, who was based in Bali.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I bought him out, I got some investors just to help me buy him out.
Right.
That's all.
Okay, interesting.
So that's for Hong Kong, and then
Mhm.
and then Hong Kong is a shareholder for Malaysia
Mhm.
when we open Malaysia as well.
Okay, so Hong Kong is basically being the parent company for
That's
all
right.
of the other smaller, setups, whether it's within Indonesia or now outside Malaysia.
that's right.
as well. Ballpark figure from going from a 1 kg roaster in
Mhm.
Bali 9 years ago to today expanding to Malaysia. What is the company worth?
What's the company worth?
Yeah, ballpark.
Well, I don't know. I've got a lot of love that goes into to the business. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. That's worth
Yeah.
a lot in that. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I haven't had the business evaluated.
Mm-hmm.
But we started off with the company selling, a few cappuccinos a day.
Mm-hmm.
Now with multiple locations, we've got multiple tons of coffee going out
Mm-hmm.
to venues all around Indonesia every week. Where
Well,
I don't know.
again, I like how you put it, because this
that's a hard one.
question of
There's-
what is the company worth does not necessarily mean dollar figure. So, but I like that when I asked that question, the first thing you said that we are selling coffee. So more coffee is being delivered, and that is the worth of the company. So
Yeah.
I like how you kind of put that.
I
yeah.
generally I'll refer back to whatever we talk about in my family or my friends and things like that. If something's expensive, I normally say that's a lot of cappuccinos.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's the reality check for my children, for my
Yeah.
what I still do, what we do is we sell cappuccinos or
Absolutely.
iced coffees or whatever, but we sell coffees.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's in 1 kilo bags or 2 kilo tins or our small reusable tins for retail packs,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that's going into making cups of coffee. And so whatever we do, we just need to make sure we constantly getting better and better at doing that, constantly getting a better product in people's hands, constantly making sure that the service we're delivering in our cafes is better and we're delivering more every day.
Mm-hmm.
If we can do that, each individual cafe value goes up, which increases our value of our overall brand.
Of course.
The more coffee we sell in our toll roasting gives us more security for the base of our brand. All the specialty stuff on top is where we experiment, we play with beautiful, delicious coffees from around Indonesia, especially, but around the world, and we get to be super passionate in what we do and deliver this great service and training, and we can over deliver on training, assessments in stores, making sure that we're giving more and more to our customers that are buying from us at a wholesale level. So every time we do that, we grow more. Our customer base grows bigger and bigger. So if our business is growing at 30% plus per year,
Okay.
we've still got a lot of growth, but as what is the company worth on a dollar value? Yeah, it's not. Currently I'm not.
It's a lot of cappuccinos.
It's a lot. It's a lot of cappuccinos.
Yeah.
But it's also something that we'll be exploring in the future.
Mm-hmm.
We're a company that is focused on growing. Through growth, we need access to capital.
Mm-hmm.
From having the challenges around foreign-owned businesses in anywhere around the world, capital is one of those things that we need to work on. How do we get access to capital? Do we need investors to come into the main business?
Yeah.
Do we need investors to come into individual stores? Do we need to sell parts of the business to grow to the stages we need to grow into?
It's interesting how the questions of business change over time. That now you're thinking about this massive expansion and acquiring capital, and think back to 9 years when you were thinking about how are we going to roast 1 kg
1
of
kilo
coffee.
at a
Yeah.
time. I know.
I mean, it's brilliant. Throughout this conversation that we've had, I can really feel that you are a businessman. You are now an international businessman. Now that you're launching in Malaysia as well. But at the heart of everything, you are a coffee expert and extremely passionate about good coffee, and that's kind of where I want to end this episode as well. I've found that coffee and taste of anything in particular is generally subjective.
Absolutely.
So, I personally do enjoy Bali coffee. I've have had Bali origin coffee, and I've loved them. I've had Malaysian coffee, Vietnamese coffee. They're very different. But as a roaster who has to cater to metric tons of coffee be going out, what is a good coffee?
The $1 million question,
Yeah.
or multi-million dollar question, right? This is a good cup of coffee is a coffee that someone will enjoy and it will make their day a little bit better. I feel sometimes in the specialty coffee world, we get a little bit too wrapped up in trying to get the best score. It needs to be a 90 plus. It needs to be this. But a good cup of coffee to me is sitting down with good friends, having a good conversation. It's sitting down in a beautiful environment. A good cup of coffee could be getting the education around the origin, the farmer. If I tell you where it came from, who was the farmer that had the vision to plant this varietal in this area of Java, where that makes that coffee. The story can sometimes make that coffee better. A good cup of coffee to someone who can't drink caffeine is a great decaf coffee. A good cup of coffee to someone who's elderly and they might want an extra hot, weak decaf oat milk coffee. To me, that's not a great cup of coffee for myself, but for them, if that's what they want and that's what they order, our staff they very much know my stand is make them the best weak decaf extra hot oat milk cappuccino that they've ever had in their life. So, and we need to make sure we enable an experience, whether that's in our wholesale or our retail, in our cafes, an experience that makes the coffee that we're roasting and when we're doing our QC and everything that we think is a great product, but we need to make the experience the thing that is creating a great cup of coffee for someone.
See, now it all makes sense, because I always, since we started this conversation, I saw that you had that passion with coffee, but now your obsession with delivering experience, I believe that could be the major force behind the success of Expat Roasters in Indonesia, and hopefully it follows through in Malaysia as well.
Hopefully it does.
Yeah, because as you, of course, working with Coke, you might know that when you go to scale, it's very hard to maintain that sentimental value with every cup of cappuccino that is sold when you're selling 10,000 cups every day.
That's right. When we were on a small scale, I said we need to implement things now that are going to be too hard to implement when we're big.
Yeah.
But if it's part of our culture, if it's part of our DNA, it flows through. Whether it's sustainable packaging, whether it's a customer service style, whether it's our obsession around QC and product, we need to do that now. We needed to do that, and we did implement these things so that it's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are. It's part of the business structure, so that when we open a new venue,
it automatically translates.
Translates. Yeah. Pouring coffee at the table for someone, and for the people to be able to see latte art for the first time. I saw it in Makassar the other day. I saw one of our baristas post. Someone was tagged him in the photo where he was pouring coffee at the table for this family, and the grandma. It was the first time she ever saw latte art on the top of it, and she was blown away.
Wow.
She's like, oh my God, wow. You can see, oh my gosh, the artist, how did you do that? Oh my gosh. And she wanted to get a photo with him. And the experience she delivered to that lady, who might have been 75, years old. And to deliver an experience like that when she's there with her family, that's what, to me, that's the
mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. We're done. So
well, this has been amazing, and I can honestly continue talking about coffee for the next half an hour as well. But Shae, thank you so much for being on the Emerge podcast. I can see that the conversation we've had around, not just the emotional and passionate side of, running a coffee business, but also around the intricacies that go into roasting coffees and starting a coffee brand, especially from Bali. I think a lot of our, viewers might find that very informative. And yeah, I'm sure that people will always come back with a lot of questions. So I'd like to leave that last 30 seconds. And how can people get in touch with you to know more about your brand or get into business with you?
Yeah, well, our brand, so Expat Roasters, we're on most social media channels. We're, websites. We've, expatroasters.com. We've, Expat Roasters Instagram, Expat Roasters Facebook, Expat Roasters TikTok, Expat Roasters LinkedIn, Expat Roasters. You've got it. So there's a million ways of doing it, or always, can contact me as well, LinkedIn or, through Instagram. So Shae McNamara. So I'm very accessible to people. I'm still on the phone to wholesale customers. I'm still on the phone to retail customers. Part of the business. That's part of my day to day is making sure that we're still delivering that service, and I'm still part of every piece that I can be part of.
Perfect. Well, I can see with that kind of hands-on approach, there's that passion really flows into everything that you do. And I find your story extremely inspiring, and I wish you the best of luck for Malaysia, and I look forward to having your coffee in KL in the next couple of months.
Yeah, thank you very much. It should be fingers crossed in the next couple of months we're accessible to everyone here as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much once again, Shae, for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, while the world's asleep, we're breaking the frame. We already grinding.